Okay, so now we look at square roots. And so the first question I have is, what is a square root? Okay, so the square root is the inverse of a squared number. So again, inverse, as we discussed in our very first video, inverse means opposite. So a square root is the opposite of a squared number. So like we have the number 9, the number 9 is a perfect square. But the inverse of that is to figure out, well, what number did we start with to get to that 9, to get to that perfect square? So that's what we use a square root for. And so the next question I have for you is, how do we express a square root? So write that down. How do we express a square root? Like, how do we know that that's what we're looking for? Well, we use a radical. Okay, and so that little sign there looks like a check mark, but then turns into a division box. That's called a radical. And so anytime you see a number inside of that radical, it's asking you to find the square root of that number. And again, square root is the inverse of a squared number. So if we have a number that's squared, they're trying to figure out, well, what number did it start with? What number did we square? So let's look at some examples. And we're only going to use perfect squares. So let's say let's start with the square root of 225. So I got to think, what number can I multiply by itself to get me 225? Well, if you did your perfect squares, then you know that this is 15 times 15. And so the square root of 225 is 15, because that's the number we took and squared in order to get 225. So we look at another one. What happens if I say, what is the square root of 196? Well, what number do I multiply by itself to give me 196? If you did your perfect squares, then you know that it is 14 times 14. So 14 squared gives me 196. So the square root of 196 is 14. Let's do another one. If I had the square root of 169, well, I know that 13 times 13 gives me 169, so the square root of that is 13. So square root is just you're trying to figure out, what number did we start with? What number did we square to get to this number inside the radical? So what number did I square to get me the number inside of the radical? One more. If I had 144, okay, what number do I square to give me 144? Well, I know 12 times 12 gives me 144, so therefore the square root of 144 is 12. So I want you guys to do the rest of them. So from 225 all the way to 1, using the perfect squares between 1 and 225. So you should end up with 14, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, all the way down to 1. But I want to see exactly which two numbers were multiplied to give me that number inside of the radical. So I want to see it exactly the way I gave it to you. That's what I want to see in your journal when you come back to school. Okay, so you're going to go from 225 all the way down to 1. You don't have to worry about 0. Go from 225 all the way down to 1.